A man in a faded hoodie and dusty sneakers walked into a luxury car dealership. Within minutes, the sales manager called security to throw him out. She told him he did not belong there. She handed him a list of cheaper dealerships across town. She laughed with her colleague about another, window shopper, wasting their precious time. What she did not know was that the man she had just humiliated was John Cena. And 3 weeks earlier, he had quietly purchased the entire dealership. He was not there to buy a car. He was there to see how his employees treated people when they thought no one important was watching. And what he discovered would change everything. The California sun blazed over Westlake on that warm Thursday afternoon, casting long golden shadows across the polished concrete of the Premier Motors Gallery parking lot. The dealership stood like a monument to success, its massive glass facade reflecting rows of luxury vehicles that gleamed under the relentless light. It was the kind of place where dreams were bought and sold, where the scent of new leather and fresh wax promised a life of comfort and status. But on this particular day, something unexpected was about to unfold. A weathered Ford F-150 pickup truck rumbled into the parking lot, its engine a modest growl compared to the purring of the exotic sports cars on display. The truck was at least 15 years old, its blue paint faded by years of sun exposure, a small dent visible on the passenger door. The driver guided it to a far corner of the lot, away from the pristine rows of luxury vehicles that dominated the premium spaces near the entrance. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, taking in the scene before him. John Cena removed his baseball cap and ran a hand over his closely buzzed hair. At 48 years old, his face carried the quiet intensity that had defined him for decades in the wrestling ring and on movie sets. But today, there were no cameras, no directors calling action, no crowds chanting his name. Today, he was just a man in an oversized gray hoodie, faded blue jeans, and worn white sneakers that had seen far better days. He had purchased this dealership 3 weeks ago through a holding company. It was part of a larger investment portfolio, but more than that, it was personal. John had always believed that how a business treated its customers revealed everything about its soul. He had heard rumors about this place, whispers of excellent sales numbers but questionable customer service, stories of people being turned away based on nothing more than the clothes they wore. So he decided to see for himself, not as the new owner, not as the WWE legend with over 200 Make-A-Wish visits under his belt, just as an ordinary person walking through the door. John stepped out of the truck and looked down at his outfit. The hoodie was intentionally oversized, completely concealing his massive 250-pound frame. The jeans were creased and faded. His sneakers were dusty from a morning spent working in his garage. He pulled the baseball cap low over his forehead, shadowing his famous face. Perfect, he thought. This was exactly how he wanted to appear. As he walked toward the entrance, the heat radiating off the asphalt, he noticed a group of employees visible through the towering glass doors. They were gathered near the reception desk, laughing about something, their body language relaxed and casual. A woman in a sharp charcoal blazer held a clipboard, gesturing animatedly, while 2 younger salesmen nodded along. Near the back, a security guard leaned against a marble pillar, scrolling through his phone. John pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The transition was immediate and striking. The oppressive California heat gave way to crisp, cool air that carried the unmistakable scent of luxury. Leather, polish, and something faintly floral from a carefully placed arrangement near the entrance. The showroom was immaculate, a cathedral of chrome and glass where every surface sparkled under strategically placed lighting. Rows of high-end vehicles stretched before him like sleeping giants, each one polished to perfection and positioned to catch the light just right. The chatter near the reception desk faltered as John entered. He felt it immediately, that subtle shift in atmosphere that happens when someone is being assessed, measured, judged. The employees glanced his way, their eyes traveling from his dusty sneakers to his shapeless hoodie to the baseball cap pulled low over his face. He saw the quick exchanges, the raised eyebrows, the almost imperceptible shrugs that said everything without a single word being spoken. One of the younger salesmen, a man in his late 20s with slicked, back blonde hair and an expensive silver watch, leaned toward his colleague and muttered something under his breath. The other man smirked and looked away, barely suppressing a laugh. John pretended not to notice. He had spent decades in the entertainment industry, a world built on appearances and snap judgments. He knew exactly what they were thinking. This guy does not belong here. He is probably lost. Certainly not here to actually buy anything. He moved deeper into the showroom, his worn sneakers making soft sounds against the polished marble floor. He stopped beside a sleek silver sports car, its body curved like liquid metal frozen in motion. The price tag displayed prominently on the windshield read $247,000. John reached out and let his fingers trace along the hood, feeling the cool smoothness beneath his touch. From across the room, he heard someone clear their throat with obvious irritation. John looked up to see one of the salesmen approaching, though approaching might have been a generous word. The young man was walking slowly, reluctantly, as if he had drawn the short straw and was now forced to deal with an unpleasant task. His name tag read, Brandon, and his smile was the kind that never quite reached his eyes. "Can I help you find something?" Brandon asked, his tone carrying more than a hint of condescension. He stopped a comfortable distance away, maintaining space as though proximity itself was beneath him, just looking around. John replied calmly, keeping his voice neutral. "Nice cars you have here." Brandon nodded, his eyes flicking toward the vehicle John had been touching with barely concealed displeasure. "That is the new model. Very popular with our clients." He paused for effect. "Starting price is around $250,000. He let the number hang in the air, watching for a reaction, waiting for the inevitable moment when this window shopper would realize he was out of his depth and slink away. John simply nodded thoughtfully. "That is quite a machine." "Yes, well," Brandon said, shifting his weight and checking his watch with theatrical impatience. "Most of our inventory is in that range. We cater to a very particular clientele." He emphasized the last word slightly, his implication crystal clear. Before John could respond, another employee called out from across the showroom. "Hey, Brandon, your client from Malibu is online too. Something about the interior package options." Brandon's entire demeanor changed instantly. His posture straightened. His smile became genuine and eager. "Coming," he called back with enthusiasm. Then, turning to John with a dismissive wave, he added, "Feel free to look around. Someone might be with you if you have any questions." And with that, he was gone, practically jogging toward the back office where important clients waited. John watched him go, his expression calm but observant. The exchange had been brief, but it told him everything he needed to know about how this dealership operated when no one important was watching. He continued his walk through the showroom, stopping occasionally to examine a vehicle or read a specification card. The other employees remained clustered near the reception desk, making no move to approach him. Occasionally, he caught them glancing his way with amusement, but no one offered assistance. No one smiled warmly. No one said, "Welcome." At one point, a well-dressed couple entered the dealership. The man wore a tailored Italian suit, the woman a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Instantly, the atmosphere transformed. Two salespeople practically sprinted across the floor to greet them. Genuine smiles appeared. Hands were shaken enthusiastically. The couple was guided toward the most expensive section of the showroom, with the reverence usually reserved for royalty. John observed this from beside a display stand, his back resting against a marble pillar. The contrast was impossible to ignore. He had been in the dealership for nearly 20 minutes now, and not a single person had genuinely engaged with him. Not one employee had treated him like a human being worthy of their time. But John was patient. He had not come here for confrontation. He had come to understand, to witness, to see the truth that hid behind the polished surfaces. He moved toward the back of the showroom, where a particularly impressive SUV sat beneath a banner announcing it as the flagship model. It was massive and powerful, the kind of vehicle that commanded attention and respect. John circled it slowly, admiring the craftsmanship despite the circumstances. That was when he heard the sharp click of heels against the marble floor. Someone was approaching, and from the confident rhythm of those footsteps, John knew this was not going to be another dismissive encounter. This was someone who was used to being in charge. He straightened and turned to see a woman walking toward him with the kind of purpose that suggested she ran this place. She was perhaps in her mid-40s, with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. Her charcoal blazer was impeccably tailored, her heels polished to a mirror shine. A clipboard was tucked under her arm, and her expression, while technically polite, carried an undercurrent of something far less welcoming. The nameplate pinned to her blazer read, "Amanda Hartley, Sales Manager." She stopped a few feet away from John, her eyes performing a quick but thorough assessment. Unlike the others, she did not look away. She held his gaze, her smile tight, her posture rigid with authority. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice cool and professionally detached. "Can I help you with something?" John met her eyes and offered a polite smile. "Just looking around. You have quite a collection here." Amanda's gaze flickered, taking in his worn sneakers, his shapeless hoodie, his baseball cap pulled low. Something shifted behind her eyes, a calculation being made, a judgment being formed. "I see," she said slowly, drawing out the words. "Well, welcome to Premier Motors Gallery. We pride ourselves on offering only the finest vehicles to our distinguished clientele." She emphasized certain words in a way that made her meaning unmistakably clear. The afternoon sun continued to pour through the glass walls of the showroom, illuminating the vehicles in their pristine glory. Somewhere in the back, Brandon was discussing interior options with his important Malibu client. The well-dressed couple was being shown the features of a luxury sedan with champagne being offered. And John Cena, the new owner of Premier Motors Gallery, stood unrecognized before his own sales manager, watching as assumptions took root and judgments were formed. He had wanted to see the true colors of this dealership, and Amanda Hartley was about to show him exactly what they were. Amanda Hartley stood before John with the practiced poise of someone who had spent years at perfecting the art of polite dismissal. Her smile remained fixed in place, but her eyes told a different story entirely. They were calculating, measuring, already reaching conclusions based on nothing more than the clothes he wore. "So?" she began, her clipboard shifting slightly under her arm. "Are you here to browse, or is there something specific I can help you find?" John gestured casually toward the showroom. "I am interested in what you have available. Maybe something with good performance. Comfortable for long drives." Amanda's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. "Long drives," she repeated, as though the concept itself was amusing coming from someone like him. "Well, our vehicles certainly excel in that department. However, I should mention that most of our inventory starts well into the six-figure range." She paused deliberately, letting the words settle like a test. "Wah, typically work with clients who have been qualified through our financial services department. It is standard practice here at Premier Motors. We find it saves everyone time and prevents any uncomfortable situations down the line." John nodded thoughtfully, his expression unchanged. "That sounds reasonable. What if I told you I was ready to make a decision today?" For a brief moment, something flickered across Amanda's face. It might have been surprise, or perhaps irritation at having her carefully rehearsed script interrupted. She recovered quickly, her smile tightening by a fraction. "I appreciate the enthusiasm," she said with forced patience. "But these are significant purchases. Most of our clients take weeks, sometimes months, to finalize their decisions. We are not the kind of establishment where people walk in off the street and drive away the same day." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy and unmistakable. "I understand," John said, keeping his voice calm and measured. "But I would still like to look around. Maybe sit in a few of the vehicles. Get a feel for what you have." Amanda's expression shifted noticeably. The polite veneer began to crack, revealing something harder and colder underneath. She glanced around the showroom, checking to see who might be watching, before stepping slightly closer to John. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "I have been doing this for almost 18 years. I can usually tell within the first 30 seconds whether someone is a serious buyer or just someone who wants to sit in expensive cars and take pictures for social media." John met her gaze steadily, unflinching. "And which category do you think I fall into?" Amanda did not answer directly. Instead, she reached into a folder tucked behind her clipboard and produced a single sheet of paper. She held it out to him with a practiced motion that suggested she had done this many times before. "I took the liberty of putting together some alternatives that might be more suitable for your situation," she said matter-of-factly. "There is a dealership about 12 miles from here that specializes in pre-owned vehicles. Very reliable inventory, much more accessible price points." John looked at the paper but did not take it. He could see the list printed there in neat columns. Used sedans, older model SUVs, vehicles that cost a fraction of anything displayed in this showroom. "That is very thoughtful of you," John said, a hint of something unreadable in his voice. "But I think I will keep looking here if that is all right." Amanda's jaw tightened visibly. She lowered the paper, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Sir," she said, and the word carried an edge that had not been there before. "I am trying to be helpful here. I am trying to save you from an embarrassing situation. These vehicles are not toys. They are serious investments for serious people." John remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. "And what makes you think I am not serious?" Before Amanda could respond, John turned and walked toward the silver sports car he had admired earlier. It sat on a slightly raised platform near the center of the showroom, gleaming under carefully positioned spotlights. He approached it slowly, appreciating the elegant lines and curves that spoke of engineering excellence. He reached out and placed his hand on the driver's door handle. "Excuse me." Amanda's voice cut through the air like a blade. She had followed him, her heels clicking rapidly against the polished marble floor. She positioned herself between John and the vehicle with practiced authority. "I am going to have to ask you not to touch the vehicles," she said firmly. "These are display models. Fingerprints, scratches, any kind of damage would be extremely costly." John looked at her, his hand still resting lightly on the handle. "I just wanted to see the interior. The interior is exactly what you would expect from a vehicle in this class." Amanda replied curtly. "Leather seats, advanced technology, premium materials throughout. If you would like more details, I can print out a specification sheet for you to take home and review." John slowly removed his hand from the door handle. He turned to face Amanda fully, studying her expression with quiet intensity. "You mentioned you have been doing this for 18 years, he said calmly. "In all that time, have you ever been wrong about someone?" Amanda blinked, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected question. "Wrong. Less," John continued. "Have you ever looked at someone, made a judgment based on what they were wearing, and then discovered you had completely misjudged them?" For a brief moment, something flickered in Amanda's eyes. A shadow of doubt, perhaps, or a distant memory trying to surface. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the familiar mask of professional confidence. "I trust my instincts," she said flatly. They have served me well in this business. John nodded slowly. I see. At that precise moment, Brandon walked past them, returning from the back office. He slowed as he approached, an annoying smirk spreading across his face. He leaned slightly toward Amanda, his voice carrying just loud enough for John to hear clearly. Another window shopper, he said with a low chuckle. We should really start charging admission for the entertainment. Amanda's lips curved into a small smile of agreement. She did not respond verbally, but the shared amusement between them was unmistakable and cutting. Brandon continued on his way, disappearing toward another part of the showroom, leaving behind the faint echo of his laughter. John stood perfectly still. He had heard every word, seen every dismissive glance, felt every ounce of contempt that radiated from their casual exchange. But his expression remained calm, almost serene. He had learned long ago that reacting to small cruelties only gave them power. Amanda turned back to John, her smile now carrying a hint of triumph. She clearly believed she had won this quiet battle, that her assumptions had been validated by her colleague's mockery. As I was saying, she continued, straightening her blazer with satisfaction. Perhaps it would be best if you came back another time, when you are more prepared for this kind of purchase. John looked at her for a long moment without speaking. The showroom hummed with quiet activity around them. Employees chatted at their desks. The well-dressed couple from earlier was signing paperwork in a glass-walled office while champagne flutes clinked in celebration. Everything seemed perfectly normal, perfectly routine. But beneath the polished surface, something was about to shift dramatically. John took a slow breath and spoke, his voice soft but steady. Actually, I think I would like to speak with the owner. The words landed between them like a stone, dropped into still water. Amanda's confident smile wavered for the first time. Confusion crept into her carefully composed expression. The owner, she repeated, her tone carrying a mixture of disbelief and impatience. You want to speak with the owner of this dealership? John nodded calmly. That is correct. Amanda let out a short laugh that held no warmth whatsoever. Sir, the owner of Premier Motors Gallery is an extremely busy person. They do not simply appear because a walk-in customer requests a meeting. That is not how things work in the real world. I understand, John replied, his voice remaining steady. But I believe they would want to know about my experience here today. Amanda's expression hardened noticeably. Her patience, already worn dangerously thin, was now completely exhausted. She straightened her blazer and lifted her chin, assuming the posture of someone about to deliver a final verdict. Look, she said, her voice rising slightly. I have tried to be reasonable with you. I have offered alternatives. I have explained our policies clearly. I have done everything in my power to help you understand that this dealership may not be the right fit for your particular needs. She took a deliberate step closer, her eyes narrowing. But you have refused to listen. You have wasted my valuable time. And frankly, you are now beginning to disturb our other customers. John glanced around the showroom. A few employees had stopped what they were doing, their attention drawn to the escalating confrontation. The well-dressed couple had paused their paperwork, watching from the glass-walled office with curious expressions. Even the security guard near the entrance had straightened from his relaxed posture, his hand moving instinctively toward the radio clipped to his belt. I apologize if I have caused any inconvenience, John said quietly, without a trace of sarcasm. But I still believe a conversation with the owner would be beneficial for everyone involved. Amanda's face flushed with barely contained frustration. She turned sharply toward the security guard near the entrance. Raymond, she called out, her voice carrying across the showroom with authority. Could you come here, please? The security guard, a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with a stern, weathered face, walked over with measured steps. His name tag confirmed what Amanda had called him. He stopped beside her, his eyes scanning John with professional detachment. Is there a problem here, Miss Hartley? Raymond asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Amanda nodded curtly. This gentleman has been asked to leave multiple times, but he refuses to cooperate. I need you to escort him off the premises immediately. Raymond turned to John, his expression neutral but firm. Sir, I am going to have to ask you to come with me. John did not move from his position. He looked at Raymond, then at Amanda, then at the employees who had gathered at a safe distance to observe the unfolding scene. The showroom had grown quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by a tense anticipatory silence. Before I go, John said calmly, may I make one phone call? Amanda scoffed dismissively. A phone call is not going to change anything about this situation. It will only take a moment, John replied. I promise. Raymond hesitated, glancing at Amanda for guidance. She rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation and waved her hand dismissively. Fine, she said sharply. Make your call. But then you are leaving this property, whether you like it or not. John reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, found the name he was looking for, and pressed the call button. He lifted the phone to his ear, his eyes never leaving Amanda's face. The showroom held its collective breath. Hey, it is me, John said into the phone, his voice low and measured. I am at the dealership right now. There has been a small misunderstanding. Could you come down and help clear things up? He paused, listening to the response on the other end. Great. See you in a few minutes. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he looked at Amanda with an expression that was impossible to read. They will be here shortly, he said simply. Amanda stared at him, her confident demeanor beginning to crack around the edges. Ooh, who did you just call? John did not answer. Instead, he walked calmly toward a leather bench near the entrance and sat down. He crossed one leg over the other, folded his hands in his lap, and settled into the posture of a man who had nothing but time. Raymond looked at Amanda uncertainly, clearly unsure how to proceed. Should I still escort him out? Amanda hesitated, visibly thrown off balance by the unexpected phone call. She was not used to situations that deviated from her carefully controlled script. Wet, she said, finally, her voice noticeably less certain than before. Let us see who actually shows up. The minutes that followed felt like hours stretching into eternity. Amanda stood near the reception desk, her arms crossed tightly, her foot tapping an anxious rhythm against the polished floor. Brandon had emerged from wherever he had been hiding, drawn by the unusual commotion. He stood with the other employees, whispering and casting nervous glances toward John. John remained on the leather bench, calm and perfectly still. He watched the afternoon light shift across the showroom floor, casting long shadows that stretched toward the gleaming vehicles. He thought about the conversation that was coming, the words he would choose carefully, the lessons that desperately needed to be learned. Then the front door opened with a soft chime. A man in his early 50s stepped into the showroom with purposeful strides. He wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of authority and success. His silver, streaked hair was neatly combed, and his posture radiated the kind of confidence that came from years of leadership. But it was his expression that commanded immediate attention. Serious, focused, and directed entirely at one person. This was Marcus Thompson, the regional director of operations for the automotive group that managed Premier Motors Gallery. His name was spoken with respect throughout the company, and his presence at any location usually meant something significant was about to happen. Marcus walked across the showroom with measured steps, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Employees instinctively stepped aside to let him pass, their eyes wide with recognition and sudden nervousness. The usual chatter died completely as everyone watched him move toward the leather bench where John sat waiting. Marcus stopped in front of John and extended his hand, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his face. "Mr. Cena," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent showroom. "It is wonderful to see you again. I apologize for any inconvenience you may have experienced here today." John stood and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Marcus. I appreciate it." The room had gone completely still. Every employee, every customer, every person in that showroom was watching the exchange with stunned disbelief. The name, Cena, hung in the air like an electric charge. Amanda's face had drained of all color. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her grip. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Marcus turned to face her, his warm expression cooling into something far more professional. "Miss Hartley," he said, his tone carefully measured. "I see you have already had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Cena this afternoon." Amanda's lips moved silently for several seconds before she finally managed to speak. "I do not understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mr. Cena? As in—" Marcus straightened his tie and spoke clearly, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear every word. "Allow me to clarify for everyone present. This is John Cena. The John Cena, WWE legend, Hollywood actor, and philanthropist who holds the record for the most Make-A-Wish visits of any celebrity in history." He paused for effect. "And as of 3 weeks ago, he is the new owner of Premier Motors Gallery." The words landed like thunder in the silent showroom. Amanda's face transformed from pale to ashen gray. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but she seemed to have completely lost the ability to form coherent sentences. Behind her, Brandon had frozen mid-step, his earlier smirk replaced by an expression of pure undiluted horror. "The new owner," Amanda repeated mechanically, her voice trembling. "He is the new owner." "That is correct," Marcus confirmed with a slight nod. He glanced at John with an apologetic expression. "I trust your visit today was not what you had hoped for, sir." John looked at Amanda, then at Brandon, then at the other employees who stood scattered around the showroom like statues frozen in time. He could see the fear in their eyes, the dawning realization of what they had done, the desperate calculations running through their minds as they tried to remember every word they had spoken. "It was educational," John said finally, his voice calm but weighted with meaning. "Very educational." Amanda took a shaky step forward, her professional composure completely shattered. "Mr. Cena," she began, her voice cracking with desperation. "I am so sorry. I had no idea. If I had known who you were, I never would have." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would only condemn her further. John looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The showroom remained frozen, every person holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "That is exactly the problem," John said quietly, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "You treated me a certain way because you did not know who I was. The question is, how do you treat people when you think no one important is watching?" Amanda had no answer. She stood there, her carefully constructed confidence completely shattered, her eyes glistening with the beginning of tears she was desperately trying to hold back. John turned to Marcus. "I think it is time we had a meeting with the entire staff. There are some important things we need to discuss." Marcus nodded immediately. "Of course. I will gather everyone in the conference room right away." He pulled out his phone and began making calls with quiet efficiency. Within moments, the showroom erupted into controlled chaos as employees hurried to comply with the directive. Whispered conversations filled the air as people tried to process what had just happened. Amanda remained rooted to her spot, her world visibly collapsing around her. Brandon had disappeared entirely, no doubt hoping to somehow avoid the coming storm. John watched the activity unfold around him with patient observation. He felt no satisfaction in what had happened, no pleasure in Amanda's public humiliation. This was not about revenge or proving a point. It was about something far more important. It was about change. And change, he knew from experience, always began with a single moment of truth. The conference room on the second floor of Premier Motors Gallery was designed to impress wealthy clients. Floor to ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the California hills. A long mahogany table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than most people earned in a month. Modern art hung on the walls, and a state of the art presentation screen occupied one end of the room. But on this afternoon, none of that mattered. The luxurious surroundings felt suffocating, the air thick with tension and unspoken fear. The employees filed in one by one, their footsteps hesitant, their faces drawn with anxiety. They took seats around the table, leaving careful distances between themselves as if proximity might somehow implicate them in what had happened. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. The only sounds were the soft shuffling of chairs and the nervous clearing of throats. Amanda Hartley entered last. She had composed herself somewhat since the showroom incident, but her eyes were still red, rimmed, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her clipboard like a lifeline. She chose a seat near the back corner, as far from the head of the table as possible, and seemed to shrink into herself as she sat down. Brandon was notably absent. He had slipped out through a side entrance shortly after Marcus Thompson's arrival and had not been seen since. His desk had already been cleared of personal items. John stood near the windows, his back to the room, gazing out at the afternoon sun as it began its slow descent toward the horizon. He had removed his hoodie, revealing the fitted black shirt underneath that showcased his legendary physique. In this room full of expensive suits and designer clothing, he still looked like an outsider, and yet there was absolutely no question about who commanded this space. Marcus Thompson stood by the door, his expression serious as he surveyed the assembled staff. When the last employee had taken their seat, he nodded toward John and quietly closed the door. The soft click of the latch echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. John turned from the window and faced the group. His expression was calm, thoughtful, carrying none of the anger or vindictiveness that everyone had clearly expected. He walked slowly to the head of the table, but did not sit down. Instead, he rested his hands lightly on the back of a chair and looked at each person in turn. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the room. "I know this is not the meeting any of you expected to have today. To be honest, it is not the meeting I expected either." He paused, letting the words settle over the room. "My name is John Cena. 3 weeks ago, I became the owner of this dealership. I did not announce my visit today because I wanted to see something important. I wanted to understand the culture of this place, the way people are treated when no one thinks it matters." A few employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone coughed nervously. John continued, his tone remaining even but gaining weight with each sentence. "What I experienced today was deeply disappointing. But I want to be clear about something. I did not call this meeting to humiliate anyone. I did not come here looking for someone to punish. I came here because I believe in the potential of this place and the people who work here." He began to walk slowly around the table, his footsteps soft against the carpeted floor. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "When I was young, I grew up in West Newbury, Massachusetts. My family did not have much. My father worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table for 5 boys. I wore the same clothes week after week because they were all we could afford." The room was utterly silent. Every eye was fixed on John as he spoke. "After high school, I bounced around trying to find my way. I worked as a limousine driver, cleaning the cars of wealthy people who never bothered to learn my name. I worked at a gym, mopping floors and wiping down equipment, while members looked right through me like I was invisible. I remember walking into places and being ignored. I remember being followed by security guards who assumed I was going to steal something. I remember the looks, the whispers, the way people would dismiss me without ever taking the time to see who I really was." He stopped walking and turned to face the group directly. Those experiences stayed with me. They shaped who I am today, and they taught me something important. The way you treat someone when you think they have nothing to offer says everything about who you really are inside. A young sales associate near the middle of the table shifted in his seat. His name tag read, Ryan, and his face was flushed with visible emotion. "Mr. Cena," Ryan said hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw what happened in the showroom. I saw how Miss Hartley and Brandon treated you, and I did not say anything. I just stood there and watched it happen." He looked down at his hands, shame evident in every line of his posture. "I should have stepped in. I should have said something. But I was afraid of making waves, afraid of getting on their bad side. And I am truly sorry for that." John looked at Ryan for a long moment, then nodded slowly with understanding. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "It takes real courage to admit when we have failed to act. The question now is what we do with that awareness moving forward." Another employee, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and nervous hands, spoke up next. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I have seen it happen before," Jennifer admitted. "Customers who do not look wealthy enough being turned away or treated poorly. I always told myself it was not my place to interfere. But that was just an excuse, was it not?" John nodded thoughtfully. "We all make excuses for the things we do not want to confront. But silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of choice. It is a choice that says this behavior is acceptable. And it is not." He walked back toward the head of the table, his expression growing more serious. "Let me share something else with you," he said. "Every person who walks through those doors downstairs has a story. They have dreams, struggles, triumphs, and failures that you know nothing about. The young man in torn jeans might be a tech entrepreneur who just sold his startup for millions. The elderly woman in modest clothing might be a retired surgeon who spent her life saving lives. The teenager in a hoodie might be the next great innovator who will change the world." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But here is the thing that matters most. Even if none of that were true, even if the person walking through that door truly had nothing, they would still deserve to be treated with dignity. They would still deserve respect. Because that is not something people have to earn. It is something they are owed simply by being human." John placed both hands on the table and leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. "And let me tell you something about business," he continued. "A customer who feels disrespected will tell 10 people about their experience. They will leave reviews online. They will warn their friends and family. They will remember how you made them feel long after they have forgotten what you said." He straightened and looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "But a customer who feels valued, who feels seen and respected, they will come back. They will bring their friends. They will become advocates for your brand. True wealth in this business is not measured in the cars we sell. It is measured in the relationships we build and the trust we earn." The room was completely still. Several employees had tears forming in their eyes. Even Marcus Thompson, standing by the door, seemed moved by the words. John turned his attention to Amanda, who had been sitting motionless in her corner, her face pale and drawn with anxiety. "Amanda," he said gently. She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. John walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. His expression was not angry, not vindictive, just deeply serious. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly." Amanda nodded, unable to speak. "If I had not been the owner," John continued, "if I had just been an ordinary person who looked exactly the way I look today, how would you have treated me?" Amanda's lips trembled. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. "Would you have given me the same respect you would give to someone in an expensive suit?" John pressed gently. Would you have listened to what I had to say? Would you have treated me like a human being who deserved your time and attention? Amanda's tears finally spilled over, running down her cheeks in silent streams. She shook her head slowly, her voice barely audible when she finally spoke. No, she whispered. I would not have. John nodded, his expression unchanged. Your honesty tells me something important. It tells me you understand what went wrong. He turned back to address the entire room. This is not about what happened to me today. I have faced far worse in my life, and I will face worse again. This is about the culture we create, the values we uphold, and the kind of people we choose to be when we think no one is watching. He looked around the room once more. From this moment forward, things are going to change at Premier Motors Gallery. We are going to build a culture where every customer is treated with respect regardless of how they look, how they dress, or what car they drive. We are going to create an environment where integrity matters more than sales numbers, and where doing the right thing is more important than making a quick profit. He straightened and took a slow breath. I believe in second chances. I believe people can change if they truly want to. But change requires accountability. It requires us to face the truth about ourselves, even when that truth is painful. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long golden rays through the conference room windows. The employees sat in reflective silence, each one processing what they had heard, examining their own actions, their own choices, their own failures. John walked back toward the window, his silhouette framed against the fading light. Tomorrow, he said, we start fresh. But before we can move forward, there are some decisions that need to be made, some consequences that need to be addressed. He turned to look at Amanda, whose head was bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Amanda, I would like to speak with you privately after this meeting. There are things we need to discuss about your future here. Amanda nodded without looking up, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The rest of you, John continued, addressing the room. Take some time to think about what we have discussed today. Ask yourselves what kind of person you want to be, what kind of legacy you want to leave. And when you come back tomorrow, come back ready to be better than you were today. He nodded toward Marcus, who opened the conference room door. That is all for now. Thank you for listening. The employees rose slowly, their movements subdued, their expressions thoughtful. They filed out of the room in silence, each one carrying the weight of John's words. A few glanced back at Amanda, who remained seated in her corner, waiting for the conversation that would determine her fate. As the last employee left, Marcus closed the door behind them, leaving only 3 people in the room. John, Amanda, and the heavy silence of accountability. The conference room had emptied, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the dealership below. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mahogany table, and the silence that filled the space was thick with anticipation. Amanda remained in her seat, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly together. She had stopped crying, but her face was still streaked with the evidence of her tears. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her actions and the consequences that now loomed before her. John pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he gave her a moment to collect herself, to prepare for the conversation that would shape her future. Marcus moved to stand near the window, his presence supportive but unobtrusive. He had worked with John long enough to know that this was a conversation best handled with patience and care. Finally, John spoke. Amanda, he said, his voice calm and measured. I want you to know that I have given this a great deal of thought. Amanda looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She opened her mouth to speak, but John held up a hand. Please, let me finish first. You will have your chance to respond. She nodded and lowered her gaze once more. What happened today was serious. John continued. You made assumptions about a customer based on appearance alone. You dismissed someone without giving them the opportunity to be heard. And when that person asked to speak with the owner, you threatened to have them physically removed from the premises. Each word landed with the weight of truth. Amanda flinched slightly but did not look away. In most situations, John said, this would be grounds for immediate termination. Many owners would not think twice about letting you go. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. She waited for the final blow, the words that would end her career at Premier Motors Gallery. But I am not most owners, John said. Amanda looked up sharply, confusion mixing with the fear in her eyes. John leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but not unkind. I believe in second chances, he said. I believe that people can change if they truly want to. But I also believe that change must come with accountability. He paused, ensuring she understood the gravity of what he was about to offer. I am giving you a choice, Amanda. Option 1 is that you resign from your position today. You will receive a fair severance package, a neutral reference, and the opportunity to start fresh somewhere else. Amanda's face paled further, but she remained silent, listening intently. Option 2, John continued, is that you stay, but not as sales manager. You would be demoted to a regular sales associate position for a period of 6 months. During that time, you would work under a new manager. You would complete a comprehensive training program on customer service and unconscious bias, and you would be held to the same standards as every other employee on this floor. He sat back in his chair, his gaze steady and unwavering. At the end of those 6 months, if you have demonstrated genuine change, if you have shown that you understand what went wrong and have committed to doing better, we will reassess your position. There are no guarantees, but there is the possibility of rebuilding what you have lost. Amanda stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. She had expected anger. She had expected to be fired on the spot. She had not expected this. Why? She asked, her voice hoarse with emotion. Why would you give me another chance after what I did? John was quiet for a moment before answering. Because someone gave me a chance once, he said softly. When I was at my lowest, when I had nothing and no one believed in me, someone saw something worth saving. They did not have to. They could have walked away like everyone else. But they chose to believe that I could be more than my circumstances. He looked at Amanda with an expression that held no judgment, only honesty. I am not saying what you did was acceptable. It was not. But I have learned that people are more than their worst moments. The question is whether you are willing to do the work to become better. Amanda sat in stunned silence. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were different. There was something like hope mixed with the shame. I do not expect an answer right now, John said, standing up. Take the night. Think about what you really want. And whatever you decide, make sure it is the right choice for you. He nodded toward Marcus and moved toward the door. But before he left, he turned back one final time. One more thing, Amanda. Brandon will not be returning to Premier Motors Gallery. Amanda looked up sharply. Brandon. John nodded. His behavior today was not an isolated incident. After speaking with several employees, I learned that this was part of a pattern. Customers mocked behind their backs. Colleagues undermined. A culture of contempt that he helped create and maintain. He paused, his expression thoughtful. Everyone deserves a second chance, he said. But that chance has to be given to those who recognize their mistakes and want to change. Brandon showed no remorse today. He hid when things got difficult. And when I offered to speak with him, he had already fled the building. Amanda nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. The difference between you and Brandon, John continued, is that you stayed. You faced the consequences of your actions. That tells me there is something worth believing in. With that, he left the room, leaving Amanda alone with her thoughts and the weight of her decision. The sun had nearly set outside the conference room windows. Amanda sat in the growing darkness, replaying every moment of the day in her mind. Every dismissive word, every condescending glance, every assumption she had made without a second thought. She thought about her 18 years in this business, the countless customers she had judged, the faces she had forgotten, the dignity she had casually discarded because it seemed easier than taking the time to truly see someone. She thought about John Cena standing in that showroom in his worn hoodie and dusty sneakers, asking simply to be treated with respect. She had looked at him and seen nothing worth her time. She had been so certain, so confident in her judgment, and she had been completely wrong. The tears came again, but this time Amanda did not try to stop them. She let them fall, let them wash away the pride and arrogance that had blinded her for so long. When the last tear had dried, she reached for her phone and sent a single message. "I want to stay. I want the chance to prove that I can be better." The response came within minutes. "Then we start tomorrow. Welcome to your second chance, Amanda. Do not waste it." The next morning arrived with a golden California sunrise that painted the Premier Motors gallery in warm light. Amanda walked through the front doors at 7:30, a full hour before her usual start time. She wore simple black slacks and a modest blouse, her sales manager blazer left hanging in her closet at home. Her new name tag read simply, Amanda Hartley, Sales Associate. The demotion had been announced to the staff the previous evening through a company-wide email. There had been no public humiliation, no dramatic confrontation. Just a simple statement that Amanda had chosen to remain with the company in a different capacity, and that a new sales manager would be appointed in the coming weeks. Some of her former subordinates looked at her with curiosity as she walked past. Others avoided eye contact entirely. A few offered small nods of acknowledgement that carried something like respect. Amanda found her new desk in the corner of the showroom floor, a modest workstation far removed from the glass-walled office she had occupied for nearly a decade. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began her first day as a regular employee. The weeks that followed were among the most challenging of her professional life. The training program John had mandated was comprehensive and demanding. Classes on unconscious bias, workshops on active listening, role-playing exercises that forced her to confront the assumptions she had carried for years without examination. But the hardest part was not the formal training. It was the daily work of serving customers without the shield of authority, without the power to delegate unpleasant tasks to others, without the comfortable distance that her title had always provided. For the first time in 18 years, Amanda had to actually talk to people, listen to them, understand their needs without making assumptions about what they could or could not afford. It was humbling. It was frustrating. And slowly, gradually, it was transforming her. 3 months into her new role, something began to shift. Amanda noticed that she was no longer automatically categorizing customers by their appearance. She found herself genuinely curious about their stories, their dreams, the reasons they had walked through the door. One afternoon, an elderly man in worn overalls and a faded baseball cap shuffled into the showroom. He moved slowly, leaning on a wooden cane, his weathered hands bearing the calluses of a lifetime of physical labor. 3 months ago, Amanda would have dismissed him without a second thought. She would have handed him a list of used car dealerships and guided him toward the exit. But today, she walked toward him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she said. "Welcome to Premier Motors. My name is Amanda. How can I help you today?" The old man looked surprised by the genuine warmth in her greeting. He studied her face for a moment, perhaps expecting the dismissal that his appearance usually invited. "Just looking," he said cautiously. "Probably cannot afford anything in here anyway." Amanda nodded understandingly. "That is perfectly fine. Would you like some company while you look? I would be happy to show you around." The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure, Why not? For the next 45 minutes, Amanda walked with him through the showroom. She learned that his name was Walter, that he had worked as a carpenter for 52 years before retiring. She learned that his wife of 48 years had passed away 6 months ago, and that he was looking for something to fill the empty hours that stretched endlessly before him. She always wanted one of these fancy cars, Walter said, stopping beside a sleek convertible. Used to joke that when we got old, we would drive down the coast with the top down and the wind in our hair. He smiled sadly. Never did get around to it. Amanda felt something tighten in her chest. She saw Walter not as a customer to be processed, but as a human being carrying the weight of loss and loneliness. "What if you did it now?" she asked softly. "What if you took that drive for both of you?" Walter looked at her, his eyes glistening. "You think?" "I think she would have wanted you to," Amanda said. "I think she would have wanted you to feel the wind in your hair and remember all the dreams you shared." Walter was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his worn overalls and pulled out a folded check. He handed it to Amanda without a word. It was a cashier's check for $273,000. Amanda stared at the check, then at Walter, her mind struggling to process what was happening. "Sold my business last year," Walter explained with a slight smile. "Did not know what to do with the money. Figured I would just let it sit in the bank until I figured things out." He looked at the convertible with something like longing. Maybe this is what I was waiting for. 2 hours later, Walter drove off the lot in his new car, the top down, his weathered face turned toward the sun. Amanda stood in the parking lot watching until he disappeared around the corner. She thought about how close she had come to dismissing him, how her old assumptions would have robbed Walter of this moment, would have robbed herself of the privilege of being part of his story. That evening, she found John in his office on the second floor. He looked up from his paperwork as she knocked softly on the open door. "Amanda," he said, "come in." She entered and stood before his desk, her hands clasped in front of her. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me another chance, for believing I could change even when I was not sure I believed it myself." John leaned back in his chair, studying her with those calm, observant eyes. "You did the hard work," he said. "All I did was leave the door open. You are the one who chose to walk through it." Amanda nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I met a customer today, an elderly man named Walter. 3 months ago, I would have looked at him and seen nothing worth my time. But today, I saw a person, a human being with dreams and losses and hopes." She paused, her voice catching. "He bought a car. But that is not the point. The point is that I finally understood what you were trying to teach us." John smiled gently. "And what is that?" "That every person deserves dignity. That respect is not something people earn through their appearance or their wealth. It is something we owe them simply because they are human." John stood and walked around his desk. He placed a hand on Amanda's shoulder. "That is the lesson," he said. "And once you truly understand it, you can never go back to the person you were before." The 6-month period ended on a rainy Tuesday in November. Amanda arrived at work that morning not knowing what to expect. Her training was complete. Her probationary period was over. And today, her future at Premier Motors Gallery would be decided. John called her into his office at noon. Marcus Thompson was there as well, seated in one of the leather chairs by the window. The atmosphere was serious but not hostile. "Amanda," John began, gesturing for her to sit. "6 months ago, I gave you a choice. You chose to stay and prove that you could change. I want you to know that your progress has not gone unnoticed." Amanda sat on the edge of her chair, her heart pounding. "I have spoken with your colleagues," John continued. "I have reviewed your customer feedback scores. I have watched how you interact with people on the showroom floor." He paused, and a slight smile crossed his face. "I heard about Walter. Amanda felt her cheeks flush. "He sends me postcards from his trips," she said softly. "He drove all the way up to Seattle last month." John nodded. "That story has become something of a legend around here. The man in overalls who bought a $200,000 car because one sales associate took the time to actually see him." He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "Amanda, I believe you have genuinely changed. Not because you were afraid of losing your job, but because you finally understood why change was necessary. That kind of transformation is rare, and it should be recognized." He slid a document across the desk toward her. "This is an offer to restore your position as sales manager," John said, "but with some important modifications. You will be responsible not just for sales, but for training, for ensuring that every employee in this dealership understands the values we discussed 6 months ago. You will be the guardian of our culture." Amanda stared at the document, her hands trembling. "I also want you to share your story," John continued. "Not the parts that make you look good, but the parts that show how easy it is to lose your way. How assumptions can become invisible prisons that trap us in our own worst instincts. Your journey can help others avoid the same mistakes." Tears streamed down Amanda's face as she picked up the document. She read through the terms, her vision blurring with emotion. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say you will accept," John replied. "Say you will use this second chance to make a difference. Not just for this dealership, but for every person who walks through those doors." Amanda looked up at him, then at Marcus, then back at the document in her hands. "I accept," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "And I promise you, I will never forget where I came from. I will never forget the lesson you taught me." John stood and extended his hand. Amanda rose and shook it firmly. "Welcome back, Amanda," he said. "Now let us get to work." The transformation of Premier Motors Gallery was not a sudden event, but a gradual evolution that unfolded over the following months. New training programs were implemented. Customer service protocols were rewritten. The culture of judgment and dismissal that had once poisoned the showroom was slowly replaced by something healthier. Employees began to approach their work differently. They asked questions before making assumptions. They listened before judging. They treated every customer who walked through the door as a potential friend rather than a potential problem. The results spoke for themselves. Customer satisfaction scores soared to record highs. Positive reviews flooded online platforms. Word spread through the community that Premier Motors Gallery was different from other dealerships. That it was a place where everyone was welcome, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. Sales increased, but that was almost incidental. The true measure of success was something harder to quantify. It was the warmth in the showroom, the genuine smiles on employees' faces, the sense that this was a place where human dignity actually mattered. And, at the center of it all, guiding the transformation with quiet patience, was John Cena. He never sought credit for the changes. He never demanded recognition or praise. He simply showed up, day after day, modeling the values he believed in and trusting that others would follow. He had learned long ago that leadership was not about power or position. It was about service, about lifting others up rather than pushing them down, about seeing the best in people even when they could not see it in themselves. That was the lesson of Premier Motors Gallery. That was the truth John carried with him through all the years of his remarkable life. And it was a lesson that was about to come full circle in the most unexpected way. Spring had returned to California, painting the hills around Westlake in brilliant shades of green and gold. Nearly a year had passed since that fateful afternoon when John Cena walked into Premier Motors Gallery in his worn hoodie and dusty sneakers. The dealership that had once been a monument to shallow judgments had become something entirely different, something better. On a warm Saturday afternoon, the showroom hummed with activity. Families browsed the gleaming vehicles. Salespeople engaged with customers of every background, treating each one with the same warmth and respect. The atmosphere was welcoming, alive with genuine human connection. Amanda stood near the entrance, her name tag now reading, Amanda Hartley, Sales Manager and Training Director. She wore her authority differently now, not as a shield to separate herself from others, but as a responsibility to serve them better. She was reviewing the morning's customer feedback reports when the front door opened and a young man walked in. He was perhaps 22 years old, wearing a faded band t-shirt, ripped jeans, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His hair was messy, and he looked around the showroom with the uncertain expression of someone who was not sure he belonged. Amanda felt something stir in her memory. The young man reminded her of someone, of a moment that had changed everything. She walked toward him with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "Welcome to Premier Motors. My name is Amanda. How can I help you today?" The young man seemed surprised by the greeting. His shoulders, which had been hunched defensively, relaxed slightly. "I am just looking around," he said hesitantly. "I probably cannot afford anything here, but I have always wanted to see these cars up close." Amanda nodded with understanding. "That is perfectly fine. Would you like some company while you look? I would be happy to show you around and answer any questions." The young man studied her face, perhaps searching for the judgment or dismissal he had expected. Finding none, he smiled tentatively. "Sure, that would be nice." For the next hour, Amanda walked with him through the showroom. She learned that his name was Kyle, that he had grown up in foster care and aged out of the system at 18. She learned that he was working 2 jobs while putting himself through community college, studying to become an electrical engineer. "My foster mom used to tell me that someday I would have a car like this," Kyle said, running his hand along the hood of a sleek sports car. "She said if I worked hard enough and never gave up, anything was possible." He smiled sadly. "She passed away last year. Cancer?" Amanda felt the familiar tightness in her chest. She saw Kyle not as a window shopper to be tolerated, but as a young man carrying dreams and grief and hope all at once. "She sounds like an amazing woman," Amanda said softly. "She was," Kyle replied. "She was the only person who ever believed in me." They continued walking through the showroom, talking about Kyle's studies, his dreams, his determination to build a better life. Amanda listened with genuine interest, asking questions, offering encouragement. As they reached the end of the showroom, Kyle stopped and turned to face her. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for treating me like a person. I have been to a lot of places where people look at me and see nothing worth their time. But you actually listened. You actually cared." Amanda felt tears forming in her eyes. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity," she said. "That is something I learned from someone very wise." Kyle smiled and shook her hand. "Maybe someday I will come back and actually buy one of these cars." "When you do," Amanda replied, "I will be here. And I will be proud to help you find the perfect one." Kyle walked out of the dealership with his head held a little higher, his steps a little lighter. Amanda watched him go, remembering the person she had been a year ago. The person who would have dismissed him without a second thought. She had come so far, and she still had so far to go. But for the first time in her life, she understood that the journey itself was the point. From his office window on the second floor, John had watched the entire interaction. He had seen Amanda approach the young man with warmth instead of suspicion. He had seen her listen, engage, connect. He had seen the transformation that had taken root in her heart, finally bearing fruit. He smiled to himself and turned back to his desk. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows as John finished reviewing the quarterly reports. Sales were up significantly, but that was just a number on a page. What mattered more were the stories that could not be captured in spreadsheets. The customers who had been treated with dignity. The employees who had discovered a better version of themselves. The culture of respect that had taken root and flourished. There was a soft knock on his door. Marcus Thompson entered, holding a tablet. "You might want to see this," Marcus said, handing the device to John. On the screen was a social media post that had gone viral overnight. It was from Walter, the elderly carpenter Amanda had helped 6 months ago. Attached was a photograph of him standing beside his convertible on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The caption read, "6 months ago, I walked into a car dealership expecting to be ignored. Instead, I met a woman named Amanda who saw me as a person, not a stereotype. She helped me buy this car, which I now drive up and down the coast in memory of my late wife. Today, I completed our dream trip to Seattle. Rose, this one was for you. Thank you, Premier Motors, for proving that kindness still exists in this world." The post had been shared over 50,000 times. The comments section was filled with similar stories from other customers, each one praising the dealership for its exceptional service and genuine care. John handed the tablet back to Marcus with a quiet smile. "This is what it is all about," he said, "not the sales numbers or the profit margins. This, one person treating another person with dignity. One moment of kindness creating ripples that spread further than we can ever imagine." Marcus nodded. "You built something special here, John. Something that goes beyond business." John shook his head. "I did not build it alone. Everyone here played a part. Amanda, Ryan, Jennifer. All of them. They chose to change. They chose to be better. I just showed them it was possible." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the showroom below. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting golden light across the gleaming vehicles. Customers and employees moved through the space with ease, their interactions marked by warmth and genuine connection. "You know what I have learned," John said, his voice thoughtful. "People are capable of incredible transformation. They just need someone to believe in them, someone to show them that their worst moment does not have to define them." He turned to face Marcus. "That is what this dealership has become. Not just a place to buy cars. A place where people are reminded of their own worth. A place where dignity is given freely, not earned through appearance or wealth." Marcus smiled. "Hustle, loyalty, respect. Is that not your motto?" John laughed softly. "Something like that, but I have learned that respect has to come first. When you treat people with dignity, loyalty follows naturally, and the hustle becomes about more than just success. It becomes about making a difference." As the sun set over Westlake that evening, casting long shadows across the Premier Motors Gallery parking lot, John walked through the showroom one last time before heading home. He passed Amanda's desk, where she was finishing up paperwork with a satisfied smile. He passed Ryan, who was enthusiastically showing a family of 4 the features of a mid-range SUV. He passed Jennifer, who was carefully explaining financing options to an elderly couple with patience and respect. Each interaction was a small victory. Each moment of genuine connection was proof that the culture he had fought to build was thriving. John stepped outside into the warm evening air. His old Ford F-150 sat in its usual spot at the far corner of the lot, its faded blue paint catching the last rays of sunlight. He climbed in, started the engine, and sat for a moment, looking back at the dealership he had transformed. He thought about all the people who had been touched by this journey. Amanda, who had discovered that second chances were possible. Walter, who had finally taken the dream trip he had shared with his late wife. Kyle, who had been treated with dignity when he expected dismissal. And countless others whose stories he would never know. He thought about his own journey. The years of struggle before success found him. The times when people had looked at him and seen nothing worth their time. The moments when someone had believed in him enough to give him a chance. That was the power of dignity. It cost nothing to give, but it could change everything for the person who received it. John pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road that wound through the California hills. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and the warm wind rushed through his open window. He smiled, thinking about all the work that still remained. All the people who still needed to be reminded of their worth, all the cultures that still needed to be transformed. But tonight, he was content. Tonight, he knew that change was possible. One person at a time, one moment of kindness at a time, one choice to see the humanity in others, even when it would be easier to look away. That was the lesson of Premier Motors Gallery. That was the truth that John Cena carried with him through all the miles that stretched ahead. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Every stranger who walks through your door has a story worth hearing. And the way you treat people when you think no one important is watching reveals everything about who you truly are. So be kind. Be patient. Be willing to see beyond the surface. Because you never know who might be standing right in front of you, waiting for someone to believe in them. And that belief, that simple act of dignity, might just change everything. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below if this story has moved you and you would like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light. Please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter we are preparing for you.